Hello there. Do you like movies but feel overwhelmed by the avalanche of titles available every week in the theaters and on streaming services? Do you struggle with justifying the increasing cost of movies at the theater or whether to pick up another streaming service? Well, I have a resource for you, OneMoviePunch. Your movie review podcast for currently playing, newly streaming classic and cult movies, one movie per day, every day. We track the theaters, streaming services, and the occasional physical release to find the best movies currently available. We watch every film, then distill it into a short 3 to 5 minute review and publish a daily podcast. And now with year 2, we've gone spoiler-free for all movies within the last 3 years and bringing on a team of reviewers with brand new perspectives and selections. Want more information? Head over to www.onemoviepunch.com to subscribe to the daily podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at OneMoviePunch and Facebook at www.facebook.com/OneMoviePunch. We'll see you there.
Welcome to the BiCurean podcast, where we explore and embrace the seeming contradictions of life. What actually is BiCurean, you ask?
While you may not necessarily have a mental concept of BiCurean, partially maybe because it's a made-up word, you embody it. What's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that which is different.
And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
And it is in the differences we carry in ourselves that we find the BiCurean moment.
When you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it. It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing.
It's letting go of the or to make room for the and. We embrace all of you. Welcome to the BiCurean.
Welcome to the BiCurean podcast. This is Eric.
And I am Isla. And this week, I'm a little fired up about a topic that I wanted to bring to the table, which is, I'm going to call it, my working title is The Trumpian Left.
That's like a non sequitur.
Is it?
It doesn't make sense in that order you said.
Yes. Well, exactly like that. So the context that I'll give you is this. I went to an event and I ran into a good friend of mine, and we were talking about some local political things. And in the course of the conversation, he said something, blah, 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 the Trumpian left or the left Trumpsters or something like that. And sort of a light bulb went off for me.
Okay.
When I heard that. I'm guessing that wasn't true for you because you felt like it was a non sequitur. But it's a little bit what I feel like I have been frustrated by in the left, and also feeling a sense of wanting to counter in some ways with this podcast and then in general in my life.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, so do you know what he was talking about? Because I can't say that based on your phrase. I've conjured several images in my head, but none of them make any real sense.
I have no idea actually what he was talking about, because I feel a sense of we understood each other, but I didn't really ask him to get into it. We just had a conversation around politics. I will tell you what I understand it to be, which is that, we look at the conservative/Republican movement right now from the left or from the middle. And what we tend to see is a small, very loud base of people that are highly committed in a rigid way to a narrow ideology or form of idealism. They use these phrases like "Make America Great Again," and they genuinely do seem to believe it. And they speak in ways that are highly offensive to many of us, not in that movement. What you were talking about, this feeling of like we have to look like you and think like you in order to be considered relevant or worthy of a vote or being spoken with, right? So there's this. So that's what I would call the Trumpian right. Is that very rigid, not super compassionate, judgmental diminishment of people. And it's either we use words like racism or sexism around it, and it's more of an overall diminishment of people as individuals if they don't fit this, as you were talking about on the episode a couple of
it's equal opportunity insults.
It's diminishing and dismissing people based on some aspect of their identity, right? Like they're an immigrant, or they're a person of color, or they're a woman, or they're gay, right? Like that.
Right. Well, then, and that was my point in the show two episodes ago, or the one before the last.
Yeah.
That essentially Trump's argument wasn't better to say, go home to your home country because you're brown, so go with your other brown people. And they said, oh no, it's because they're socialists, Democrats, whatever. And it's like, huh. So you're really not backing up on the diminishment part.
Right.
You're just backing up on the stupid thing you said, say a different stupid thing about it.
Yes. And so I'm going to lay out my theory / point / argument. And one of the reasons that I didn't, for our listeners, really go into detail in this with Eric, although I did share some context with him around it, is that I sort of want to present this live to him and have a chance for him to interact with it, in that if it is confusing or stupid, maybe we won't air it, but probably we will, because he doesn't let me get away with that.
So in case anyone is wondering, the questions I have about this are actually legitimate, because at this point, I have no idea.
I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Is talking about.
So there's that. But you're on board. You understand what I'm talking about in terms of the conservative Trumpian that we're constantly frustrated by if we aren't part of that group, whatever our ideology is.
Yes.
My sort of perception of this concept of the Trumpian left is it's a very similar attitude, in that it is a rigid adherence to a set of standards, and they become single issue importance. So, for example, the Trumpian left says things like, if you voted for Trump, you are a racist, and therefore you don't deserve our time.
Yes.
Or if, as a man, you've ever said anything that could be interpreted as not respectful towards women, you have committed assault or harassment and are part of the Me Too movement.
Banned for life.
Banned for life. And this is, and it's a similar form of idealism in my perception, in that, and it is not based so much on identity as it is on actions. However, single actions sometimes, or prominent actions. And there isn't, as you pointed out when we were talking about the Me Too movement, unlike our penal code, where there's a process for being indicted, tried, convicted, and then rehabilitated or allowed to start over, we don't have that in this perspective, right? It's one and done. And I was really thinking about that, like there, and I do feel like this was the best summary for me of a set of behaviors that I've seen in a larger context for the sort of left's movement, that really, to me, identify one of the problems. And honestly, that particular set of behaviors or attitude really actually, and part of why I call it the Trumpian left, or liked that name, is it actually reinforces Trump's power base. It's the same thing that he's doing from a different perspective, and it's often in reaction to things that he does. And so he'll do something, or people who support him will do something, and then the left will react in that way and actually strengthen his base and his hold on the power structure of our country. And we're sort of descending into this single issue hate campaign, whatever your issue is, back and forth, and going down together, in my opinion.
Yeah. This is resonating with me on something that I've had kind of an issue with, and I haven't talked about it on the show too much. It just hasn't necessarily come up. But what's resonating for me is the fact that you mentioned, yes, the right loves to diminish the left on whatever issue, And I mean, it has become socially acceptable to diminish people on skin color, sexual preference, creed, religion, whatever, right? Like, if you don't look like them, and that was the point that I made. But the problem that I'm fundamentally having right now with my so-called socialist brothers and sisters is that I'm constantly being diminished by them. And I get why, to an extent, Because if somebody says, well, you're not black, you'll never understand the plight of blacks. You're white and you're part of the problem because you have white privilege and whatever. Like, no matter how well meaning that may be, I've now been diminished and removed. So even being an ally becomes hard because I just don't get it.
Mhm.
And we're in a world right now where there are people diminishing us en masse as a whole. And we have a lot of tribal infighting. And it's causing a problem in that we're very fractured. And most people are only interested in serving whatever their big issue is, whatever their tribal problem is. So I'm all for people, that are looking out for gay rights, which I'm very active in, working in that side of things. And black, Hispanic, go down the list and acknowledging those people. But because I'm a white man, I've almost just been told they don't want my help because I'll never get it. I don't know what victory in that situation for those people looks like, other than the clear message I have received, not from everyone, and I don't want to generalize. I don't want to say every person I've ever met like walked up and did this, but when it has happened, it makes me beg the question of what does victory look like? Because obviously I should just go away. They apparently have it handled because they get it and I can't. We went to a white privilege symposium last year and it was wonderful because it was the first time I've been somewhere where I felt like the majority of the people I ran into were actually thankful that I was there, that I cared to actually understand what the issue is. And the message that I received in a lot of the, we were in a bunch of different rooms with a bunch of different speakers, and the message that I received from most of them was, we're past the pity part. The things you can do are to acknowledge and understand, and beyond that, like it was the beginning of conversations about how things could actually change, not just you're a white man, you don't get it.
Well, one of the things that you said to me right afterwards was that you really appreciated being given clear direction around. You were like, in the conversations, people said, work on being anti-racist. And you were like, oh, well, that makes sense.
Don't ignore racism when you see it.
I can do that. And instead of feeling the sense of, like you said, where you've been in situations where it's more about embodying some form of guilt, which doesn't help anyone, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, you're right. Like the left, the left eats its own, and there we do this to Republicans and conservatives, and we do it to ourselves in terms of. But both sides, or all sides, I think also that this is a plague amongst the independent and unaffiliated. Like their stance of idealism is, I'm smarter than you guys. There's a sort of self-satisfied apathy or like stepping out of the situation instead of recognizing that not being political, being able to be not political is usually a privilege. Mostly people who have
there's privilege for you. All person privilege, right?
Yeah,
not white, not female, not male. That's just privilege.
So people who are like, oh, I don't feel like being political, usually what that means is they don't understand the level of privilege that they have. And I won't say always, right? But that's a thing. And it's a lack of like accountability. And that's actually what I see in all of these situations in the independents or the unaffiliated folks, libertarians, Republicans, conservatives, and Democrats, liberals, that all of the groups, the real difference, the Trumpian way is this very two-dimensional approach to dealing with other humans.
Yeah.
It's a form of like diminishment and blame. Those two things are usually attached in this situation rather than a sense of being human, like three-dimensional engagement with other people.
Yeah.
And the difference between accountability and blame, right? Where blame is the fault-finding situation. I got to figure out who's in trouble so that I don't get in trouble, right? Accountability, and it's something, I'm obviously very active in the campaign for Lorena Garcia for Senate here. And I was thinking about like, well, what is it about her that I really like? And and she's not the only candidate with this trait, but she's one that I've seen demonstrate it a lot. And it's one of the things that drew me towards her originally was a sense of accountability. And it was because the reality is that when you're dealing with complex situations, you're going to have unexpected results. Sometimes those are mistakes. Sometimes they're a lack of forethought. And sometimes they're simply an unexpected result. And to me, how you deal with that is one of the most important aspects of leadership. And to me, an accountable leader, when an unexpected result occurs, steps forward and says, okay, did this harm anyone? And how do we make sure the people in our community are taken care of because of this unintended consequence that they didn't sign up for, right? Do that. That's not a blame thing, right? You don't start with, who messed this up. You start with who's affected and how do I actually address that? And then what do we do to mitigate the circumstances overall? And then how did this occur? How do we prevent it? What do we need? Is it preventable? Sometimes it isn't. How do we go back to the drawing board in a way that allows us to move forward and not have this result or unintended consequence again? And to me, that's accountability. And yes, does someone have to say, oh, maybe I wasn't paying attention, or own a behavior that's not consistent with where they started? But that's a real difference to me than this idea of blame, whereas we look for someone to scapegoat and throw to the wolves. It's not serving us. It's not serving us as a country or communities. It's certainly not serving the people who are currently being harmed by what's happening. And that's a big difference, right? Like, you can't make Me Too. I fully believe, I'm a woman. I know 100% that Me Too and the power of finally having people listen to what's happening is a critical aspect towards changing how we do things.
Yes.
And we need a process. It can't just be someone says something and believe the victim.
Flambe them online, and if they had a career, it might be gone. There's your victory.
Yeah, it's not enough because there's no real process. And the reality is that, yeah, we need to believe the victims for sure. And in a larger sense, we need to recognize that it's a systemic problem, and crucifying one or two public figures isn't actually going to fix the systemic problem. It's going to make people angry and afraid.
Yeah.
Or
it doesn't
entitled.
affect that college student that maybe raped somebody. You never heard that story, right? It never happened. If it made it online, it made it online to somebody on Twitter and then their 50 friends or whatever. But it's no less relevant because of the lack of prominence of the person who committed it. So we're using prominence to punish people, to a point where the crime, it feels good because we can watch them. But realistically, it doesn't solve the ultimate problem because those people were not the only people who have done sketchy things.
Right. And so to go a little bit further back in terms of this, from a political perspective, when I think of the Trumpian left, I think of things like Congress or the Senate or even local politics like city councils, where hopefully we have a mix of representatives. And one of the things that I really appreciated about AOC was there was an early tweet conversation. It was a few months ago. I guess it wasn't early. And Ted Cruz, who maybe I don't love, posted something about how he felt like campaign finance reform was important. And she wrote and said, put together a bill. I'll co-sponsor it or I'll support it or whatever. And Cruz was like, you would work on something with me? And she goes, if you have a legit bill addressing this, absolutely. Because she's focused on the issue. She's not focused on who's working on it with her. And maybe there's 98% of the things that he stands for. She's like, no way. I have no idea. But he's putting out an idea that she's like, oh, yes, we need this. You're right. She's not afraid to say that. And I feel like a lot of our, I'll put Democratic because that's where I often had tended to lean. A lot of our Democratic representatives are afraid to do their job and work with people from the other party because the vehement hatred right now is the vehement polarized hatred is so big. And
it goes both directions because
the
Republicans are just as unlikely to want to work with anybody. There was a bill, I don't even remember what it was we were talking about, and you said that Mitch McConnell shot it down. And it's like, Yeah, I'm certain that there was something in it, even though it was around
It
security,
was election security.
election security. And my first thought, and you looked it up, and it turned out to be true. And I don't remember all the details, but the point is, I said I'm certain that they rolled something in there that would benefit minorities, rights to vote, or something like that. And it's just become a point of contention. And lo and behold, you read the article out loud to me, um, and that's exactly what it was. There was something in there
Mhm.
that Mitch McConnell specifically said, this benefits the Democrats. I won't push it forward.
And
Now,
yeah.
we need security around the polling places. And we're ignoring that bill because of flagrant bipartisan polarization.
Yeah. And that and yeah, I agree that both like the it's a 100% investment in this situation. And really though that we've been duped in terms of as a country, so many of us have bought into the idea of because Trump's words are so indecent and his um his way of presenting is really highly offensive and diminishing of people. And it's rough. It's really rough to deal with that.
But we're learning from it. And I've seen people that I would even call friend that have learned this behavior because I've started to use language like he's not he can't help. He's not gay like us. He's not this or she's not that.
Well, and
And
that's
so they're discounting, but like we're all on the same side.
Mm.
I've done a ton of work to actively promote, you know, things involving race and discrimination and LGBT issues and rights. And just because I'm not gay, it does not mean I need to be diminished the same way that Trump would diminish four of our Congress people based entirely on the fact that they're socialists
well,
and they don't love America because they don't think like him.
yeah, and I feel like that's the real part. You don't love America because you don't think like him. And I feel like that's what the left is doing in their own way. You don't really care about our country because you aren't doing, or you did do X, Y, and Z, right? And that's what I mean by when I say the Trumpian left. And my issue with it, and just to be clear, like, yes, all of these things are happening. Like, people are being harmed because of racist and sexist and anti-immigrant behaviors and policies. Like, the the people who are being harmed are being harmed. This is happening. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't stand against that. However, my experience is that there's a real difference between blaming and judging and diminishing and dismissing groups of people and actually holding people accountable and addressing the problem and helping the people that are being harmed. And I feel like so much energy is going into trying to win these verbal fights or these social media fights or the war of perception that we're losing sight of the actual need of the people who are being harmed by the policies that are being enacted.
Yeah, and it does involve stepping out of your tribe a little bit.
It does
It
involve
doesn't
that.
involve giving up on your key issue because let's face it, we all probably have one or three key issues, right? But I met somebody right before Governor Polis was elected here in Colorado,
Mhm.
and we were talking, and you could just tell we were like on the same page on everything. And the subject of Polis came up because I think it was around the time we interviewed him right before the election, and with venom they spit out like, "Oh, I can't stand him. He's terrible on education." And it's like, fair. You don't agree with something that he may have done. Maybe he's not the ideal policy, but he's won our party's nomination for governor in the state. And after a point, would you rather have the other guy? So I get it, but we're going to probably have to compromise. We're all going to have to compromise a little. And we're all going to fight a war of inches for a lot of these things that are going to be sea changes, right? Like we're talking about massive shifts. Gay marriage is legal. Not only legal, but protected now. Like, that happened, and it took years. And we're in danger of moving backwards on things like Roe v. Wade getting overturned because tons of people, you can turn on any news channel, and if they interview somebody that voted for Trump, they're just as likely to say they did it to get the justices that are now in place because they'll tolerate Trump being bad for 4 or 8 years to get their values legislated on by the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to understand that this is not the next thing that happens, the next person I vote for, the next person that gets elected has to solve my issue, or I'm not going to vote for them. Because that's what's happening too, is that a lot of people just don't show up to vote. Hillary didn't represent a lot of people's interest.
Yeah.
And even with Trump spewing hate on the other side, it did not motivate people to go out and vote because Hillary didn't excite them. She may not have been the person that we needed, but she was the person we got.
Well, and that's a side. I have a lot of thoughts on that are tangential for sure to the topic at hand.
But my point is, we don't want to lose sight of the bigger picture just because we're fighting to get this one thing that's mostly important to us and probably important to our immediate tribe of friends and family and connections.
Well, and I would say yes. And in terms of like the larger perspective that I am hoping to encourage people to consider is if you don't think you're part of the problem, you probably are, in that what's actually happening is people are engaging in this very narrow-minded mudslinging, and they feel completely justified because the other side is being so awful. And the reality is that anybody who's had any interpersonal issues ever in their life knows that if you get into a back and forth mudslinging thing with a human in your world, one of you just has to stop it. One of you has to stop it and figure out how to be decent. And it has nothing to do with things that are fair. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're justified or they're justified. It has to do with, do you want to live in this environment? And if you don't, then you are responsible to do what it takes to stop it. And part of that is recognizing that the Trumpian left is doing all the same things around a different set of issues and behaviors because they don't understand it's the same. We see how disgusting and ugly it is over there. And we don't take on, this is bad, we're doing it too. But we're like, we're allowed to because we're right. But it's the same kind of blame and dismissal that's happening in the whole crew. And that's where one of the things that I found after I sort of was thinking that through was this article that I shared, and I'll link it to the comments, which in the Washington Post, and it said, chances are you're not as open-minded as you think you are.
Which I loved. This you did share with me, and I would love to do a whole show on it because I think it's important. But yeah, people are not as open-minded as they think they are. And so I was actually going to suggest something for our listeners, and it's a challenge I'm going to accept for myself. And I would like to challenge our listeners to do the same thing. And that is at least once per day, possibly more times, depending on my mood that day. If I catch myself diminishing anybody for any reason, that person's Republican, they're stupid, or anything like that, right? If you catch yourself saying that person's doesn't look like me, doesn't have my same beliefs, doesn't talk the way that I do, doesn't think the way that I do, followed by some sort of diminishment, stop. Catch yourself, pay attention, and think of the ways in which you could actually change that narrative. Understanding that they probably would do the same thing. Why don't we be the good guys and good girls in the story? Why don't we stop our diminishment? Stop saying, oh, that politician's stupid because they did this, or that person's stupid because they don't think the way I do. I think it would make a big difference.
Yeah, I really do. I think if we could take it on, even just like you said, inside of ourselves, it might change some of the kinds of conversations that we have. And we could maybe engage in genuine discourse. The blog post that I put up today was 3 tips for better internet conversations. And one of them was based on an experience I had recently where it was on a Facebook page of my friends and I interacted with this human, and the conversation went, I don't know, it went really well, but it started off a little uncertainly. And one of the things that I've taken on in internet conversations is really working to remember the person that I'm talking to, a person, to connect.
Oh, it's so hard to do when it's just text on a page, but it's so important.
And I said connecting pixels to people. And what I found was really interesting to me about this particular conversation was, neither of us was gentle, right? Like, we were pretty forthright. We didn't use careful language. And so initially, like I said, it was a little iffy. And then, like I said, I was sitting there and I'm like, I know that this person is friends with this other friend of mine because they don't have, like me, 7,000 friends on Facebook. Like, they actually just have people they know. And so I'm going to pretend I'm in their living room. What would I expect to meet in their living room? And I'm just to engage. I'm going to read everything from the perspective of that. And I'm going to speak from the perspective of that. And by the time it was done, they were like, yay, another person in my tribe. And it was a really positive interaction. And I thought, I didn't have to be careful. I didn't have to hedge my bets. All I had to do was actually feel a sense of how would I engage with this person and their friends if I was hanging out in their living room. And so it's one of the tips I put on there because I thought, it's really true. Like, if I met someone through you, I would make certain assumptions about who they are. And so if I engage with them as if those things are true, there's a likelihood it's going to go pretty well, because you do have a tendency to have friends who have, like, they're open-minded, they're thoughtful, they'll take a challenge, but they'll give it back, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
We're
so,
not going to agree with everybody.
No.
And if you've surrounded yourself with people that only agree with you, you're doing yourself a disservice.
So, but it was that kind of thing where I was like, what you're talking about, like, really saying, like, it's the same thing, I think, in a different way of saying, like, I'm going to really try and work on making sure I'm actually seeing people as people instead of seeing people as part of a group or pixels on a page. And what is that going to do? Because I do think that that's part of why we have some of these really negative interactions, is we forget that these are actually people.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's absolutely true. So
that was the thing that was firing me up is I think in a certain way just owning that while it's not the same subject matter or the same cause, that the left is in a lot of ways as rigidly, idealistically judgmental and blaming. And we are becoming, as a country, whatever our party, single issue haters. And we are passionately losing our country to this painful situation. And we're doing it together. We need to stop.
Yeah, I agree.
Welcome to the BiCurean moment.
So, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I recently discovered through the power of the internet.
I've heard of that.
Have you? It's a good thing. Through the power of the internet, a clothing line that is meant to be washed infrequently. And I decided to try it out. It's recommended.
Sounds like a terrible experiment for college kids or something.
Yeah, no, it's for this particular company that I discovered was for some guys who had traveled the world and didn't like luggage. And so they basically worked to develop clothing that they could travel in without having to wash it so that they didn't have to take luggage on their trips.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty neat. I don't even know that I could travel without at least a bag. Like, I don't go anywhere without a bag. But the other concept part of this is that it is also intended to be it's about climate change and sustainability. One of the major uses of water in American households is laundry.
Yeah.
And some of that is laundry detergent advertisers, in order to get you to use more detergent, have really worked to train people to wash their clothes when they don't necessarily need to. Obviously when something is, stinky and super dirty, you need to wash it. However, there are certainly things that, have been maybe gently used, or like jeans. Part of the reason they were invented was because they could last for a while. And so finding that balance, right, between, as you said, college students, I think hygiene and sustainability is something that some of these clothing companies are looking at. So there are others besides the one that I found, and their focus is developing clothing because it would reduce the amount of washings you would need to do and therefore be beneficial to the environment. So it has a practicality aspect in terms of things like travel, and then also positive benefit to the environment. And many of them are made with merino wool, which is a naturally occurring fiber on sheep, merino sheep.
That they
And
don't have to kill the sheep to get.
that they don't have
That's
to kill the
that's a
sheep to get.
key.
As I said, like, so it doesn't kill any animals. It's not synthetic. It doesn't use chemicals to be developed. It is, good on the environment, and it makes your travel a little bit lighter in terms of packing. So I was like, wow, this is a pretty cool concept. So I ordered one and I tried it. And the other thing I like about it is that in the summer when you're kind of dealing with all of the heat and the impact that can have on your body, I'm like, oh, I actually just feel more comfortable the way that it fits. It has, I guess, a body temperature regulation thing going on. And
Yeah.
so
As an athlete, like technology, when it comes to that stuff, it's come a long way, and it's pricey. But yeah, when you put on a really good piece of cycling kit or a well-made piece of clothing that has moisture wicking and temperature balance, it's amazing.
and this is all natural. Like the moisture wicking and the temperature balance is actually just what the sheep's wool does. They need it too, I guess. I mean, if you've
Yeah.
seen pictures of them, they're very like woolly.
I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea. Although you have given me a new cause that I have to stand up and fight for, which is naked sheep rights. Naked
What?
sheep have rights too.
Yes, absolutely. The right to provide me with the option for clothing. So
Hopefully their wool grows back quickly.
yeah, well, there you go. So at any rate, that was my BiCurean moment, sort of this combination of different things.
Yeah. Um, I've been reading a lot of articles, and I'm happy about this. That there's been a lot of talk about diversity and celebrating the diversity, and it's really made me think that sometimes it's okay to maybe take a step back and say, we don't need to necessarily make any particular group exalted. If we just came at it from the aspect and the idea of celebrating diversity, looking at somebody who does something different or looks different or talks different or whatever, and said, wow, that's cool. Mad respect for you keeping your culture alive because it's how you grew up and that's what your experience is. But just take a step back for a moment and just celebrate all of the different colors of the rainbow, as it were, an LGBT reference there, but many other things, that you can take away from that and just say, it's pretty cool. There's a lot of people who have done things differently and they look different and they have just an amazing history or culture. And we mix that together in this country for the most part successfully. And it's just a mentality shift. We can't make things better for anybody until we can really stop and celebrate the fact that their uniqueness and our uniqueness can go together. So,
And they definitely don't need to get in each other's way.
no.
I mean, I think that's it. Like
And if you're afraid or you don't understand it, that's okay.
Yeah.
Ask them about it. Be respectful, but find out. Just where's our curiosity and our desire to celebrate uniqueness?
Yeah.
We could all use it. So,
Agreed.
anyway, that's our show for the week.
So thanks for listening. If you have ideas, feedback, thoughts, please find us on social media or email us. We are BiCurean, BiCurean, everywhere. Or you can give us a call at 720-507-7309, or you can email podcast@BiCurean.com.
And if you like what we're doing, please tell your friends about us and share the episodes you find most interesting.
Thank you.